This is the Biltmore Estate. At 180,000 square feet with 250 rooms, constructing this massive French-style chateau in the 1890s cost the equivalent of $150 million in today's money. A single-family home of this magnitude requires a staggering amount of capital to build, and an even larger question is why anyone would think they needed it. While George Washington Vanderbilt II was the name on the deed, the money belonged to his grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore. The Commodore built the greatest private fortune the world had ever seen by ruthlessly consolidating shipping and railroad monopolies. He treated the stock market like a personal casino and crushed competitors to amass his wealth. But where the Commodore's capital was tied up in moving parts, steamships and locomotives, his grandson's inheritance was being poured into a stationary 180,000 square foot pile of stone. Inheritors who grow up entirely detached from the process of generating wealth often fall into a pattern of aimless, unchecked consumption. George Vanderbilt bypassed productive business investments or railroad expansion, choosing instead to sink his inheritance into a French chateau deep in the mountains of North Carolina. This map shows the footprint of the original estate. To build his vision, George converted liquid capital into 125,000 acres of land. He filled the rooms with imported European art and carved stone, dropping a palace modeled after French royalty into a rugged, undeveloped American landscape. Biltmore was never meant to produce a profit. It was the physical proof of a dynasty that had begun to financially devour itself. Building this monument in the 1890s required a massive workforce that highlighted the sharp economic divide of the Gilded Age. For local laborers, the work was physically intense. They hauled materials and built scaffolding for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Even for the elite artisans, the pay was modest. Highly trained stonemasons brought in from New York City earned $3.50 a day. But the general laborers, predominantly segregated African-American crews, earned around just $1 a day for backbreaking work. The foundation of America's grandest private residence rested on a massive supply of cheap, segregated labor. As soon as the construction crews left, the math of the estate shifted. Biltmore was a property that required a small army to maintain every day, yet it produced no actual revenue. When the 1913 federal income tax arrived, the family's liquid wealth dropped, while daily upkeep and taxes spiked upwards. Then, a massive 1916 flood destroyed the estate's only profitable farms. Watch the revenue line drop to zero as expenses continue climbing. After George's sudden death in 1914, his widow, Edith, was left holding what biographer Denise Kiernan called an architectural albatross. Desperate for cash, Edith sold 86,700 acres of the Pisgah Forest for just $5 an acre. She eventually sold off another 1,400 acres to real estate developers, carving out the land to create a residential neighborhood called Biltmore Forest. The cost of maintaining a Gilded Age fantasy was so high, it required the physical dismantling of the empire to pay for it. The mounting maintenance bills at Biltmore mirrored a spending pattern that was playing out across the entire family tree. Heirs like Reginald Vanderbilt spent millions on gambling and horses. He lost the equivalent of $2 million at the roulette table in a single night, and eventually died broke. He left his infant daughter, Gloria, with only a fraction of the original wealth, leading to a bitter custody battle over the remains of her trust fund. In New York, the family's footprint was erased. The 70 palatial mansions that once lined Fifth Avenue were almost all demolished and replaced by commercial real estate. The greatest private fortune in American history disappeared in a few generations, because the family's priorities shifted from building new systems to maintaining old displays. Today, the Biltmore Estate is the last major physical relic of the Vanderbilt Empire. But the vast private fortune that built it is gone. It was no longer enough to save the house from the threat of the wrecking ball. To keep the estate from falling into ruin, the family did something the original Vanderbilts never would have considered. They opened the doors and began selling tickets to the general public. A house built to isolate the rich from the working class is now kept alive solely by the admission fees of everyday Americans. Huge fortunes can build monuments to excess, But without adaptation, even the grandest of empires eventually devour themselves.